Hi, Jonathan York from Bay Financial Partners. Look at the investment markets. Really quite an interesting time out there in the US and the stock market. You've seen the S&P reaching record highs. Dow is under a little bit of pressure. On the S&P, that's really a combination of pretty good earnings and certainly nowhere near as bad as people expected. Economy is still pushing along at a reasonable rate as they sort of try and reopen and get back to a more sort of normal level given the COVID restrictions. Now, COVID's still quite an issue out there. The US having anywhere between sort of 40 to 60,000 new cases a day. And despite what President Trump says, that's not really good news. But interestingly, they do seem to be sort of plateauing out there in the US now, and indeed, the sort of rate of increase in terms of cases on a day-to-day basis appears to be sort of starting to sort of fall. Obviously, the other good news is certainly on the vaccine front. You had last week Russia announcing the first sort of vaccine out there. That's still yet to be proven. But certainly most of the big sort of drug companies around the world seem to be making some pretty good progress on a vaccine for COVID-19. On the political front, this week we got the Democratic virtual convention. That's expected, obviously, to announce that Joe Biden will be their candidate for the presidency elections coming up in November. And interesting to note, at present in most of the polls, Joe Biden is still comfortably ahead. Now, obviously, for President Trump, his big sort of draw card really has been certainly his ability to be able to talk to conventions and really get, sort of whip up hysteria within those supporters. That's obviously not happening under the restrictions with COVID. But also as well, obviously, the economy, despite the S&P reaching record highs, sort of Main Street is still not that sort of buoyant out there. Obviously, the other big issue is obviously COVID and the handling of that, and certainly on that, the US population appear to think that President Trump and his administration have really done a pretty poor job. If you look at the numbers, President Trump's approval rating on his handling of COVID, the disapproval rating is over 60%. That could make it pretty hard to turn that around for the November election to get re-elected. So really, it's going to be pretty interesting in the next sort of 3 to 4 weeks just to see how that, certainly the COVID sort of turns around if it does, but also as well the economy as well. Now, obviously, oil holding a reasonable bid, sort of $42.50 a barrel. So that's really on the back of the economies gradually getting back up and running. and sort of increased demand, certainly coming out of China as well. Interesting as well, if you look at some of the commodity prices, and as that Chinese economy really does start to ramp up, that's sort of having a pretty major impact, certainly on iron ore prices. Now, Europe's facing a sort of second wave of COVID out there. France are reporting increased cases, and that's really as they started to reopen the border, people starting to move more freely around the European continent. So much so that the UK has now introduced quarantine procedures for people coming back from some European countries, a 14-day stand down before they can go back into the workforce and the UK population. In the UK as well, obviously, you've still got Brexit sort of rumbling away. People seem to have forgotten about that. And there's going to be some pretty hard negotiations on that. And you suspect that sort of deadline will get pushed back again because of COVID. Australia is still having a second wave of COVID as well. Obviously, Melbourne was the hot spot. Now you've got a little bit of a flare up in Sydney as well, with one of the security guards working at one of the quarantine hotels. Likewise, in New Zealand, we've now got COVID back out in the community, and that's really putting the government under a pretty increased pressure out there, especially given their testing regime that appears to have been less than sort of satisfactory. This is on the back of reports that people working in the sort of quarantine facilities weren't having regular testing, and about 60% weren't getting tested at all. So on the back of this flare-up, no real surprise that the Prime Minister has pushed out the election now to October the 17th. But really quite interesting, she said that it won't get changed again. It will go ahead on October the 17th. That was just as the economy was sort of starting to sort of push on and get a little bit of momentum going. And now obviously you've got Auckland back in level 3, the rest of the country in level 2, and it's really just sort of a slow grind again. What is quite interesting is the housing market is holding up pretty well. A lot of analysts and economists were expecting the housing market to take a pretty severe dive, but that really hasn't been the case. Now, investors will have a bond in the marketplace. That's a fixed bond, 7 years. Minimum rate will be 240. So if you are interested in that fixed 7-year bond at 2.4%, call us on 0800 867 323. As discussed many times, if you are looking for income options, there are plenty of alternatives available out there, given this low interest rate environment. And call us on 0800 867 323 or go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.